A racist white woman is rushed to the hospital where a doctor saves her life. When she awakens, she is outraged to see a black man standing over her. The emergency room buzzed with the steady rhythm of life or death decisions. Nurses moved swiftly, and monitors beeped in harmony with the controlled chaos. Dr. Elijah Matthews stepped into the fray, his eyes scanning the room with the calm precision of someone who had seen it all before. A nurse approached him, her expression tight. "Dr. Matthews, we've got a situation. Bethany Wallace, 56. Critical condition. She's in surgery now, but there were complications." Elijah nodded, already focused. Without wasting time, he suited up and made his way to the operating room, the gravity of the situation settling in. Miss Wallace had been brought in after collapsing at her home. It was a routine surgery, until it wasn't. His role now was to salvage what he could. The surgery stretched on for hours, Elijah's hands steady and precise. He blocked out the noise, the distractions, even the small tremors of exhaustion that had started to creep into his body. When he finally finished, he peeled off his gloves and looked at the clock. Hours had passed, but Miss Wallace was stable. His part was done, and she was alive. More than alive. She was going to recover fully. He left the operating room, not for applause or gratitude, but for the next case. But not long after, his pager buzzed. It was Miss Wallace. She had woken up. Inside the recovery room, Miss Wallace's face was pinched with pain, her eyes narrowing as Elijah entered. Her gaze flicked over him, eyes hardening as they landed on his face. "You!" she spat, her voice sharp. "I want to speak to the real doctor, not you." Elijah had expected this. Years of experience, both medical and personal, had prepared him for moments like this. Racism wasn't new. It just came in different packages. He stood at the foot of her bed, calm as ever. "I performed your surgery, Miss Wallace," he said, his tone neutral. "Your condition was critical, but you pulled through. You're on the path to recovery." Miss Wallace's lips twisted in a sneer. "I pulled through? You call this pulling through?" She pointed at the bandages on her stomach, her face flushed with anger. "I've never felt worse in my life. What did you do to me?" Her words carried a venom he knew all too well. Elijah glanced at the chart, confirming her vitals were normal. "The surgery was a success," he said, keeping his voice even. "Your recovery will take time, but you're healing well. I'll check on you again in a few hours." "I don't want you to check on me," she snapped, her voice rising. "I want someone who knows what they're doing. I'm not some charity case." Elijah stayed silent for a moment, feeling the room shrink under the weight of her words. He had faced this kind of hostility before, the kind that didn't care about facts or the truth, only about what was on the surface. Miss Wallace didn't see him as a doctor, just a black man, and that was all she needed to condemn him. "I assure you, Miss Wallace," he said quietly, "you're receiving the best care available, but if you'd like a second opinion, I can arrange it." She huffed, turning her face away from him. "Get me someone else," she muttered. "I want to talk to the hospital director, someone who actually knows what they're doing." Elijah nodded once, his face unreadable. "I'll inform the director of your request." He left the room without another word, feeling the familiar pang of frustration settle into his chest. In the hallway, Elijah's footsteps slowed as he replayed the exchange in his mind. It wasn't the first time he'd encountered a patient like Miss Wallace, and it wouldn't be the last. It didn't matter that he had saved her life. She would only ever see his skin. Years of medical school, training, and experience had taught him to rise above it, but it didn't dull the sting. Back in the staff room, he pulled off his surgical cap and leaned against the counter, closing his eyes for a brief moment of peace. The noise of the hospital hummed around him, steady and familiar, grounding him. "Dr. Matthews?" A nurse stepped in, breaking his quiet. "Miss Wallace is still asking for you." Elijah sighed, opening his eyes. "She wants the director," he said, already knowing how this would play out. The nurse hesitated. "I heard her yelling something about getting you fired. Should I?" Elijah shook his head. "It's fine. Let the director handle it. I'll check in on my other patients." Back in the recovery room, Miss Wallace seethed in her bed, muttering under her breath. She didn't care that the man had saved her life. All she could see was the way he looked, his face. A doctor like him didn't deserve to be in a place like this, she thought. She'd get him fired. Someone like him couldn't be trusted with people like her. As she lay there stewing in her own anger, she didn't realize that her recovery was progressing better than expected. Despite her complaints, she was healing faster than anticipated, thanks to the very man she despised. But Miss Wallace didn't see that. All she saw was a target. Miss Wallace was moved to a private room later that day, her complaints echoing through the hallways as she settled into the sterile hospital bed. The nurses were gentle and professional, but her temper flared at each minor inconvenience. She buzzed the call button constantly, demanding immediate attention, never satisfied with the explanations given. The room, with its crisp white sheets and machines softly humming beside her, did nothing to ease her bitterness. Elijah entered her room the next morning, chart in hand, bracing himself for the inevitable confrontation. He had checked her vitals earlier. Everything was progressing as it should. Still, he knew she would find something to latch onto. Miss Wallace was already frowning as he stepped inside. Her arms were crossed, her face pale, but no longer showing signs of distress. Physically, she was healing, but her scowl remained, hard and fixed. The tension in the room was palpable. "Good morning, Miss Wallace. I'm here to check on your progress," Elijah said, his voice calm. "You again," she said, her tone dripping with disdain. "Didn't I make myself clear? I don't want you touching me." Elijah approached her bedside with the same steady professionalism he always carried. "I'm your assigned doctor, Miss Wallace. I performed your surgery, and I'm here to ensure that you recover properly. Your vitals look good," she sneered. "Oh, I bet they do. You probably messed me up so bad that even the machines can't tell what's wrong. I can feel it. I've been hurting ever since you worked on me." He could see where this was headed. She wanted him to slip up, to admit to something, anything, that would give her the upper hand, but there was nothing to give. Elijah had done everything by the book, and Miss Wallace was in far better shape than she would admit. "I understand recovery can be uncomfortable, but the pain you're feeling is typical after surgery. I can adjust your medication if necessary, but from what I can see, you're healing well," she scoffed, throwing the covers off her legs dramatically. "You think I don't know my own body? I've never felt like this before. It's you. It's what you did to me." Elijah remained composed. "If you're in pain, I can help with that, but rest assured, your surgery was successful. You're in good hands." "Good hands?" Her voice was rising now. "I don't believe that for a second. You think I don't know what this is? You think I don't know what's going on here?" She glared at him, her eyes narrowing with contempt. "You people always think you can get away with anything." Elijah's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. He had heard this kind of accusation before, and he knew that responding would only fuel her anger. Miss Wallace wasn't finished. "I've seen doctors like you before. I know what kind of care you give. You think you can come in here and do a half job just because you don't like the look of me? I'll have your job for this. Mark my words." "I'm sorry you feel that way," Elijah replied, keeping his voice measured. "But I assure you, I've provided the best care possible. You don't get it, do you? I want to speak to the hospital director. I want someone who knows what they're doing, not someone like you." She spat, her words laced with venom. "You've made me worse, and I won't stand for it." Elijah stood still, watching her, not reacting to the insults she hurled his way. He nodded once. "I'll inform the hospital director of your request," he said quietly. "In the meantime, please let the nurses know if your pain increases. I'll be back to check on you later." As he turned to leave, she yelled after him, her voice echoing down the hallway. "You better believe I'm going to make sure they hear about this. You won't be working here much longer." Later, in Dr. Karen Holloway's office, Elijah relayed the situation. Dr. Holloway sat behind her desk, her brow furrowed as she listened. "She's been like this since she woke up," Elijah explained. "I've reviewed her case multiple times, and everything is going according to plan. Her vitals are good, and she's recovering better than expected. But she insists there's something wrong and blames me." "Dr. C," Holloway sighed, rubbing her temples. "This isn't the first time we've dealt with a patient like her. The accusations are unfounded, but if she keeps making noise, it could turn into something bigger." She glanced at Elijah, her eyes softening with sympathy. "You've done everything right, Elijah. We both know that, but she's not going to let this go." "I know," he said quietly, keeping his frustration in check. "She wants to speak to you. I told her I'd pass on the message. I'll talk to her." Dr. Holloway agreed, leaning back in her chair. "But you should know, she's already started making threats. She mentioned getting you fired, and I wouldn't be surprised if she's thinking about a lawsuit." Elijah nodded, though the weight of the situation pressed on him. "I've been through this before," he said, a trace of weariness in his voice. "I just want to make sure the facts are clear." "They are," Dr. Holloway assured him. "I'll handle the administrative side of things, but you keep doing what you do best. We'll deal with Miss Wallace, but don't let her get to you." "I won't," Elijah replied, though the pressure was unmistakable. He knew that no matter how professional he remained, Miss Wallace's accusations had the potential to create waves, even if they were baseless. Back in Miss Wallace's room, the air was thick with tension as she fidgeted restlessly in her bed. Every movement was exaggerated, every groan louder than necessary, as if she were performing for an audience that wasn't there. Her eyes darted to the door each time it opened, expecting Dr. Matthews, ready to launch another attack. The nurses moved around her with quiet efficiency, knowing better than to engage with her outbursts. But every time a shadow appeared at the doorway, her lips would curl in anticipation of another confrontation. She wasn't done, not by a long shot. The atmosphere in the hospital had shifted by the third day of Miss Wallace's stay. The tension she stirred with her constant complaints seemed to hang in the air, affecting everyone around her. The nurses now traded shifts with reluctant sighs when her name came up. And even the hospital staff who passed her room felt the change in mood. Dr. Elijah Matthews, however, remained focused. He had dealt with patients like Miss Wallace before, angry, entitled, and unwilling to accept help unless it came from someone who fit their idea of what a doctor should look like. But the stakes felt higher this time. Each morning, Elijah approached her room with a steady resolve, knowing exactly what awaited him. Elijah entered Miss Wallace's room that morning, the familiar tightness in his chest creeping in as she glared at him from her bed. Her face, flushed and twisted with frustration, was already set in a deep frown. She didn't bother to greet him. "I want to see someone else," she said the moment he crossed the threshold, her voice sharp. "Not you. I've had enough of you." Elijah, keeping his posture relaxed and his tone neutral, approached her bedside. "Miss Wallace, I understand you're upset, but I'm here to check your progress. Your recovery is going well, and you should be discharged in a few days." Miss Wallace scoffed, throwing her hands in the air dramatically. "Discharged? You must be joking. I feel worse than when I came in here." She pointed a shaking finger at him. "And I know it's because of you. You messed me up. My pain's gotten worse, not better." Elijah stayed calm, opening her chart and reviewing her latest results. "Your vitals are stable, and your surgical site is healing. The discomfort you're feeling is a normal part of recovery. If you're still in pain, I can adjust your medication." "You can adjust nothing," she snapped, her voice rising. "I don't trust you. I never did. How do I know you even did the surgery right? You people always think you can get away with anything." The emphasis she put on "you people" was unmistakable. Elijah paused, letting her words settle in the air. She wasn't just attacking his abilities. She was attacking his very presence in her life, his existence as a black doctor. He'd heard it before, and he knew responding with anger would only give her what she wanted. "I assure you, Miss Wallace, your surgery was performed according to standard procedures, and you're recovering well. My priority is your health," he said, his voice steady. "You're lying," she said, her face reddening with fury. "You've been lying this whole time. I can feel it in my bones. You did something to me, and I'm not going to let you get away with it." Elijah met her gaze without flinching. "If you'd like a second opinion, I can arrange for another doctor to examine you. But I've done everything in my power to ensure your recovery." Miss Wallace's lips twisted into a cruel smile. "Oh, I'll get a second opinion, all right. I'll get one when I sue this hospital for everything it's worth." Elijah didn't respond immediately. Her threat hung in the air between them, her eyes flashing with a sense of power she hadn't had before. She had found her weapon, and now she was ready to use it. "I'll be back later to check on you," he said calmly, turning to leave the room. "Oh, you'll be back, all right?" she called after him. "But it won't be to check on me. It'll be to pick up your things because you'll be out of a job." Dr. Karen Holloway sat across from Elijah in her office, her brow furrowed in thought. He had just finished explaining Miss Wallace's latest outburst, her threats of a lawsuit now firmly on the table. "She's escalating," Dr. Holloway said, tapping her fingers on her desk. "I've spoken to legal, and while there's no real case here, she could cause a lot of trouble. Even baseless lawsuits can harm the hospital's reputation." Elijah remained quiet, processing the weight of the situation. He had done nothing wrong, but Miss Wallace wasn't interested in facts or professionalism. She had found a way to wield her prejudice as a weapon, and now she was trying to tear him down with it. "I know this is hard," Dr. Holloway continued, her tone softer, "but we stand behind you. Your work speaks for itself. Her claims have no merit." "I appreciate that," Elijah replied, his voice calm but firm. "But I can't pretend it doesn't weigh on me. It's not just about me losing my job. It's about how easy it is for someone like her to try to tear everything down because of how I look." Dr. Holloway sighed. "I know. It's infuriating, and it's unfair. But we'll deal with this. She'll be discharged soon, and hopefully, this will be behind us." Elijah nodded, though the tightness in his chest hadn't eased. He knew how these things could go. Even if Miss Wallace didn't have a real case, the damage could be done just by her making the accusation. "I'll keep doing my rounds," Elijah said, standing up. "Let me know if anything changes." Dr. Holloway watched him leave, her expression tight with concern. That evening, Elijah made his way back to Miss Wallace's room. It was the same routine. He checked her vitals, ensured she was healing, and prepared for the barrage of complaints. This time, she was ready. The moment he walked in, she clutched her side dramatically, her face contorting in mock pain. "Ow!" she cried, wincing as though he had just struck her. "What did you do to me?" Elijah frowned, stepping closer to check her incision. It was clean and healing properly, But Miss Wallace continued her act, gasping and holding her side as though she was in unbearable pain. "I'm in agony. You did this. You've made me worse!" she yelled, her voice louder now, attracting the attention of nearby nurses. "Miss Wallace, your incision is healing fine. I'll adjust your medication for the pain, but this is a normal part of recovery," Elijah said calmly, refusing to engage with her theatrics. "No, it's not," she shouted. "You botched this. You're trying to get rid of me, aren't you? I'll sue you. I'll sue the whole hospital." The nurses exchanged uneasy glances, but Elijah kept his focus. "I'll have someone check in on you later. Please rest." As he turned to leave, Miss Wallace's voice cut through the hallway, sharp and venomous. "You won't get away with this, Dr. Matthews. I'll see to it you're out of here. You'll never work again." By the time Elijah reached the nurse's station, he could feel the tension in his shoulders, the exhaustion that came not from the long hours, but from the weight of the accusation. He could hear Miss Wallace's voice echoing in his head, repeating her threats over and over. Greg Sanders, the hospital's security chief, approached him, concern etched on his face. "I heard she's causing more trouble," Elijah nodded, rubbing his temple. "She's not letting up. She's threatening a lawsuit now." Greg shook his head, crossing his arms. "People like her. They think they can bully their way through life. Don't let her get to you, Doc. You've done nothing wrong." "I know," Elijah replied, though it did little to ease the tightness in his chest. "I just want to get through this without it blowing up." Greg patted him on the shoulder. "You've got the hospital's support. If she tries anything, we'll handle it." But as Elijah walked away, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was far from over. Miss Wallace wasn't just an angry patient. She was on a mission, and she wasn't going to stop until she had what she wanted. 2 more days passed, and with each sunrise, Miss Wallace's hostility only grew sharper. She'd complained to nearly everyone who would listen: nurses, hospital staff, other patients who happened to pass by. The room had become a battleground of accusations and threats, each encounter a draining performance of feigned pain and outrage. Elijah kept his composure, but the weight of her constant barrage was wearing on him. Miss Wallace's discharge day had arrived. Elijah reviewed her chart one last time, confirming everything was in order. She was ready to go. Her incision had healed well, her vitals were stable, and her recovery, though slow, had progressed as expected. Yet the battle wasn't over. Elijah entered her room that morning, knowing this would be another confrontation. Miss Wallace was sitting up in bed, her arms crossed, her face set in a scowl. She didn't look like a woman on the verge of leaving the hospital. If anything, she looked ready for another fight. "You're being discharged today," Elijah said calmly, his eyes meeting hers. "Your recovery has gone well, and you're fit to leave." Miss Wallace glared at him, her lips curling into a sneer. "Discharged? You think I'm just going to leave like this? I'm not going anywhere until I get what I want." Elijah raised an eyebrow, but remained composed. "Miss Wallace, you've recovered from your surgery, and the hospital has provided the care you needed. It's time for you to continue your recovery at home." She shook her head, her face flushed with anger. "I don't trust you. I don't trust any of you. I know you've been trying to get rid of me this whole time, but I'm not leaving until I talk to someone who actually knows what they're doing." Elijah kept his voice steady. "The hospital director is aware of your concerns. You've spoken with her and she supports the treatment plan. You're cleared to go. I don't care what she says." Miss Wallace's voice grew louder, her frustration spilling over. "You people are all in on this together. I'm not leaving until I'm sure you haven't done something to me that I don't know about." Elijah paused, carefully considering his next words. "Miss Wallace, if you refuse to leave, we'll have no choice but to involve hospital security. You've been discharged. Staying here any longer would only hinder other patients from receiving care." Her eyes flashed with fury. "You wouldn't dare." Elijah didn't flinch. "Security will escort you if necessary. It's your choice." For a moment, the room was silent. Miss Wallace stared at him, her chest rising and falling with heavy breaths. She was calculating, trying to figure out if she could push this further, but Elijah had drawn the line. He had given her every opportunity to leave on her terms. Suddenly, Miss Wallace leaned forward, clutching her side in mock pain. "Ow! Ow! You see what you've done to me? I can't even move without feeling like I'm going to collapse. And now you want to throw me out like I'm trash?" Elijah didn't respond to her theatrics. He turned to the nurse standing by the door. "Please call security." Minutes later, Greg Sanders appeared at the doorway, his tall frame filling the entrance. His eyes immediately went to Miss Wallace, who was still performing her exaggerated display of pain. "Miss Wallace," Greg said, his voice firm but polite, "you've been discharged. It's time for you to leave the hospital." She looked up at him, her face contorted in a mix of anger and defiance. "I'm not going anywhere. I have a right to be here until I know I'm fully recovered." Greg sighed, stepping into the room. "Ma'am, We've followed all the procedures. You've been cleared by your doctor. If you refuse to leave, we'll have to escort you out. Miss Wallace's expression hardened. Go ahead, try. I'll sue this entire place into the ground. You're not getting rid of me that easily. Greg remained calm. That's your decision to make. But right now, you need to leave the premises. We don't want to escalate this any further. Miss Wallace sat back in her bed, arms crossed defiantly. I'm not going anywhere. Greg exchanged a glance with Elijah, who gave a slight nod. This wasn't going to end peacefully without intervention. Greg motioned to another security officer standing outside the door. Within minutes, Miss Wallace's belongings had been gathered, and she was placed into a wheelchair, her furious protests filling the hallway. As Greg wheeled her out, Miss Wallace continued her tirade, pointing a trembling finger at Elijah, who stood at the nurse's station, watching from a distance. You think this is over? I'll be back. I'm going to make sure everyone knows what you did to me. I'm going to ruin you. Elijah kept his face neutral, though inside, the weight of her words settled uncomfortably in his chest. This wasn't the first time a patient had threatened him, but the anger behind Miss Wallace's accusations felt more personal. She was determined to tear him down, not because of anything he had done wrong, but because of who he was. As the security team escorted her out of the hospital, the air in the ward seemed to lighten. The tension that had gripped the staff for days began to dissipate. Nurses exchanged relieved glances, their shoulders relaxing as the echo of Miss Wallace's voice finally faded. Later that day, Elijah sat in his office, reviewing patient files, when Dr. Holloway knocked on his door. She entered with a weary expression. I heard what happened, she said, sitting across from him. Greg told me everything. Elijah nodded. She wasn't going to leave voluntarily. Dr. Holloway sighed, running a hand through her hair. It's not over, though. I've already heard from our legal team. Miss Wallace is threatening to come back tomorrow and sue the hospital. She's not letting this go. Elijah leaned back in his chair, feeling the weight of the news settle over him. I figured as much. Dr. Holloway studied him for a moment before speaking again. You've handled this with more patience than most people would, Elijah. I know this isn't easy. I'm used to it, Elijah replied, his voice steady but tired. It's just exhausting, she nodded, understanding in her eyes. We're with you, Elijah. The hospital's backing you no matter what she tries to pull. Thank you, he said quietly. Though the tightness in his chest remained, he knew this wasn't the end. Miss Wallace had made it clear she wasn't done, and tomorrow there would be another battle to face. As the sun set and the hospital grew quieter, Elijah took a moment to sit alone in the staff room, letting the stillness calm his nerves. The weight of Miss Wallace's threats, the constant barrage of accusations, and the racial undertones of her hostility had taken their toll. But he had done his job. He had done it well. And no matter what Miss Wallace tried, he knew he had the truth on his side. But knowing that didn't make it any easier. The hospital was unusually quiet the following morning, but Elijah knew that peace was only temporary. Miss Wallace had promised to return, and he had no doubt she'd make good on her threat. He prepared himself for the inevitable clash, knowing this time the stakes were higher. She wasn't just angry anymore. She had her sights set on destruction. By mid-morning, the doors to the hospital swung open, and there she was. Miss Wallace, her face still twisted in the same fury as before, marched into the lobby with the determination of someone who had convinced herself that she had been wronged in the worst way imaginable. Flanked by a younger man, her lawyer no doubt, she stormed past the receptionist, heading straight for Dr. Holloway's office. Elijah watched from a distance as the tension in the lobby grew. The receptionist nervously called security, and within minutes, Greg Sanders appeared, moving toward Miss Wallace and her lawyer. Elijah stood back, observing, waiting for the moment when he'd inevitably be dragged into the confrontation again. In Dr. Holloway's office, the atmosphere was thick with tension. Miss Wallace sat in a chair across from Dr. Holloway's desk, her lawyer standing beside her, arms crossed. Dr. Holloway remained calm, but her expression was stern as she addressed them both. Miss Wallace, Dr. Holloway began, her voice measured. I understand you've returned to discuss your concerns, but as I've told you before, Dr. Matthews provided you with the best care possible. Your surgery was successful, and you were discharged in a stable condition. Miss Wallace cut her off, her voice shrill. Best care possible? He nearly killed me. I've been in pain since the moment I left here, and I know it's because of him. Her lawyer, a man in his mid-30s with a practiced frown, leaned in. Miss Wallace is filing a lawsuit against both Dr. Matthews and this hospital for medical negligence. We have reason to believe that Dr. Matthews failed in his duties, resulting in her prolonged suffering. Dr. Holloway didn't flinch. We have thoroughly reviewed Dr. Matthews' work, and there's no evidence to support that claim. His treatment was well within medical standards, and Miss Wallace's recovery went as expected. Miss Wallace slammed her hand down on the desk. You're all protecting him. You think I don't know what's going on here? You're covering for him because you don't want the scandal. Well, I'll make sure everyone knows what happened. Elijah remained outside, near the nurse's station, listening to the muffled voices from Dr. Holloway's office. His heart pounded in his chest, but his face remained calm. He had dealt with this type of confrontation before, but the weight of it was always the same. The accusations, the blatant disregard for the truth, it all felt heavy. A burden he never asked for but had to carry. After what felt like an eternity, the door to Dr. Holloway's office opened, and Miss Wallace stepped out, her face flushed with anger. Her lawyer trailed behind, scribbling notes on a pad. Dr. Holloway followed them out, her expression unchanged. Elijah, she said, motioning for him to come over. He walked toward them, keeping his steps measured, his face unreadable. He could feel Miss Wallace's eyes on him, filled with venom as he approached. Miss Wallace, Dr. Holloway continued, this is Dr. Matthews. He's more than willing to explain any part of the procedure or your recovery that you're concerned about. Elijah turned to Miss Wallace, his voice calm. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them. But as I've said before, your recovery was typical for this type of surgery. There were no complications, and you were discharged once you were medically stable. Miss Wallace sneered, her lawyer stepping in before she could speak. We'll be pursuing this in court, Dr. Matthews. I suggest you prepare yourself. You won't be able to hide behind hospital protocols once this goes public. Elijah kept his tone even, though inside he could feel the familiar frustration building. There's nothing to hide, and I stand by the care I provided. You were treated based on the highest medical standards. Miss Wallace's face reddened, her voice rising. You'll regret this. You people always think you can get away with anything, but not this time. I'll ruin you. Elijah's gaze didn't waver. I did my job, and I'll continue to do so. The facts will speak for themselves. The lawyer looked at Dr. Holloway. We'll be in touch with the hospital's legal team. With that, Miss Wallace and her lawyer turned and stormed out of the building, their footsteps echoing in the quiet hallway. For a brief moment, the tension in the room hung thickly between Dr. Holloway and Elijah. She's not going to let this go, Dr. Holloway said softly, her eyes following the pair as they left. But we'll deal with it. You did everything right. Elijah nodded, but the tightness in his chest remained. He knew the hospital had his back, but Miss Wallace's threats still lingered, her words sharp and pointed like a wound that refused to heal. Later that day, Elijah found himself sitting alone in his office, staring at the patient files in front of him, but barely seeing them. His mind was still wrapped around the confrontation, the weight of Miss Wallace's accusations bearing down on him. He had done everything right. He knew that. But in situations like this, the truth often took a backseat to perception. A knock on the door interrupted his thoughts. Greg Sanders stepped in, his usual calm expression unchanged. You okay, Doc? Greg asked, leaning against the doorframe. Elijah nodded slowly. Yeah, I'm fine. Just tired of this. Greg gave a small shrug. I get it. People like her. They're always looking for someone to blame. Doesn't matter what the truth is. They see what they want to see. Elijah leaned back in his chair, exhaling. I just want it to be over. Greg nodded in understanding. It will be. Eventually she'll realize she doesn't have a case. Until then, we just have to weather the storm. Elijah offered a faint smile. Thanks, Greg. Greg tipped his head and stepped out, leaving Elijah alone with his thoughts once again. The rest of the day passed uneventfully, but the shadow of Miss Wallace's threat loomed over the hospital. Nurses whispered about the confrontation, though they tried to keep it from Elijah's ears. Despite the support from his colleagues and Dr. Holloway, Elijah felt the tension lingering, an invisible burden he carried with him through every hallway. As the day came to a close and the hospital began to quiet, Elijah sat in the break room, staring out the window at the fading sunset. The weight of the day pressed down on him, but there was a small comfort in knowing he had done his best. Whatever Miss Wallace tried to do, whatever accusations she threw at him, the truth would stand. But as Elijah sat there, watching the last light of the day fade into night, he knew this battle wasn't over. Miss Wallace would come at him again, and when she did, he would be ready, steady as ever, standing tall in the face of her rage. The morning was quiet at the hospital, but beneath the surface, Elijah Matthews knew it was only the calm before the storm. Miss Wallace had been relentless in her pursuit to ruin his career, and now the lawsuit was officially underway. He had expected this from the beginning, but hearing the words come from Dr. Holloway just a few days ago still made it feel like a blow he couldn't fully prepare for. As Elijah moved through his rounds, he noticed the tension building around him. Nurses, doctors, and even patients seemed to feel it, the weight of the impending battle. His colleagues gave him reassuring smiles, their unspoken support clear, but the burden remained his to carry. A week passed, and the legal battle began to take shape. The hospital's legal team was hard at work, gathering evidence to fight back against Miss Wallace's accusations of malpractice and racial discrimination. Elijah knew he had done nothing wrong, but the possibility of the case damaging his reputation still gnawed at him. Then one morning, Greg Sanders, the head of security, walked up to him near the nurse's station, his expression serious. "She's back," Greg said, his voice low. "Miss Wallace, she's here to see you." Elijah's chest tightened. It wasn't surprising, but the confrontation he knew was coming felt more real now. Miss Wallace had already filed the lawsuit. Why was she back? He didn't have long to think before Greg added, "She's insisting on talking to you personally." Elijah took a deep breath. "I'll handle it." Elijah stepped into the small conference room where Miss Wallace sat with her lawyer. Her face was as hard as ever, twisted with the same bitterness he'd seen in her from the start. She stared at him as though he were the source of all her pain, and her lawyer sat beside her, his posture stiff. "You," Miss Wallace spat the moment she saw Elijah. "You think you can just walk in here and everything will be fine after what you did to me?" Elijah felt the weight of her hatred in the room, but this time, he wasn't going to let it pass by. This time, he had something to say. "I've given you the best care I could," Elijah said calmly, but his tone was firm. "I saved your life, and I've treated you with the same professionalism I give every patient. What you've done, from the moment you woke up, is accuse me of things that aren't true. And you're doing it for one reason, because you can't accept that someone like me helped you." Miss Wallace leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. "You think this is about race?" Elijah met her gaze steadily. "I know it is. You've treated me with nothing but contempt since the moment you saw me. And not because I did anything wrong, but because of what I look like." Her lawyer shifted uncomfortably, but Elijah wasn't finished. "I've worked my entire life to be where I am," Elijah continued, his voice growing more intense but never losing control. "I've faced people like you before, people who look at me and only see my skin color. But you, Miss Wallace, you've gone further. You've tried to destroy my career, my reputation, because you can't accept the fact that I'm the one who saved you." Miss Wallace's face flushed with anger, but she didn't interrupt. "You want to believe that I treated you poorly because it fits your idea of who I am," Elijah said, his voice steady. "But the truth is, I treated you with the same care and respect I give every patient. Your recovery went well because I did my job. You're alive because I did my job." The room fell silent. Miss Wallace's lawyer cleared his throat, sensing the tension between them. "Dr. Matthews," the lawyer began, his voice cautious. "We'll be proceeding with the case, but—" "You should proceed," Elijah interrupted, his eyes still on Miss Wallace. "Because when this goes to court, the truth will come out. And the truth is, I did everything I could for you. Your claims won't hold up because they're built on hate, not facts." Miss Wallace's expression remained cold, but her silence was telling. Her lawyer nodded curtly before gathering his papers, clearly eager to leave. "We'll see you in court," the lawyer said, ushering Miss Wallace out of the room. She threw one last venomous glance at Elijah before disappearing through the door. The weeks leading up to the court date were long and exhausting. The hospital's legal team worked tirelessly to gather records, interview witnesses, and prepare for the case. Throughout it all, Elijah continued his work, but the weight of the lawsuit never fully left his mind. The day of the hearing arrived with a sense of finality. Elijah sat quietly in the courtroom, flanked by Dr. Holloway and the hospital's attorneys. Miss Wallace was seated across from him, her expression still hardened with anger and resolve. Her lawyer presented her case, making claims of negligence, incompetence, and racial discrimination. But as the hospital's defense team began their argument, the cracks in Miss Wallace's accusations became apparent. One by one, the hospital's attorneys dismantled the claims, presenting evidence of Elijah's flawless record, the thoroughness of his care, and the success of Miss Wallace's surgery. Medical experts testified to Elijah's professionalism, and patient records showed that her recovery had progressed exactly as expected. The courtroom grew quieter as the truth became impossible to ignore. Miss Wallace shifted in her seat, her confidence faltering. The judge listened carefully to both sides. But as the hospital's case unfolded, it became clear that Miss Wallace's accusations had no real basis. In the end, the judge delivered the verdict. The case was dismissed. Miss Wallace's claims of negligence and racial discrimination were unfounded, and her lawsuit was thrown out. Elijah sat quietly as the words sank in. Relief washed over him, but so did a lingering sense of weariness. He had known the truth would win, but the fight had taken its toll. Later that evening, back at the hospital, Elijah stood in his office, staring out at the fading light of the city. Dr. Holloway knocked gently on the door before stepping inside. "It's over," she said softly. her voice filled with quiet satisfaction. The judge dismissed the case. You're in the clear. Elijah nodded, the relief settling deeper now. I knew we'd win, but still, I didn't think it would be this draining. Dr. Holloway gave him a small smile. You handled this with grace, Elijah, more than anyone could have expected. We're proud of you. Thank you, Elijah replied, his voice quiet but grateful. I couldn't have done it without the support of the hospital. Dr. Holloway stepped closer, her eyes filled with sincerity. You deserve to be here. Don't let people like her make you forget that. Elijah nodded, offering a small smile. I won't. It's just exhausting, you know? Always having to prove myself. I know, Dr. Holloway said softly, but you've proven yourself, Elijah, to everyone. With that, she left him alone in his office, the soft click of the door behind her echoing in the quiet room. As the night fell, Elijah took one last look at the city before turning away from the window. The battle had been won, and the truth had prevailed. But the scars from Miss Wallace's hatred remained, a reminder of the challenges he still faced as a black doctor in a world that wasn't always fair. But for now, he could breathe a little easier. The storm had passed, and he had come through it stronger, standing tall despite everything that had been thrown at him. The fight wasn't over. Not really. Elijah had thought that winning the lawsuit would bring a sense of finality, a clean break from the stress and hostility that had been hanging over him for weeks, and, in many ways, it had. But as the days passed, he realized that victory wasn't the end. It wasn't a magical reset button that made everything go back to the way it had been. There were still wounds, invisible but deep, that hadn't fully healed. A few days after the court hearing, Elijah found himself back in the familiar routine of hospital life. He moved through his rounds, greeted patients, and consulted with his colleagues like always. But there was an underlying tension, something unspoken, yet unmistakable. One afternoon, as Elijah reviewed a patient's chart at the nurse's station, Greg Sanders approached him with a thoughtful look on his face. You know, Greg began, leaning against the counter, I've been thinking about how this whole thing went down. Elijah glanced up, curious. What do you mean? Greg crossed his arms, his expression serious but calm. That lawsuit, the way Miss Wallace came after you, it wasn't just about the surgery. We both know that. It was bigger than that. People like her, they're not used to being in a position where someone like you has power over them. That's why she tried to destroy you. Elijah nodded, understanding what Greg meant, though the truth of it still stung. It's not the first time I've dealt with it, he said quietly, but it's exhausting. I did everything right, and it still wasn't enough. Greg looked at him, his gaze steady. It was enough. It was more than enough. You beat her. You didn't let her take you down, and that's something. Elijah smiled faintly, appreciating Greg's support. I know. But I guess I just thought that once the case was over, it'd feel like a clean break. Instead, it feels like I'm still carrying some of it with me. Greg gave him a sympathetic nod. That's normal. Battles like that leave scars. But you're still here, and that means something. Elijah sighed, glancing at the chart in his hands. I guess I just don't know how to shake the feeling. Maybe you don't have to, Greg said, his tone thoughtful. Maybe it's not about shaking it off. Maybe it's about carrying it with you and letting it make you stronger. Elijah looked at him, considering his words. Maybe, he said softly. Maybe you're right. Later that evening, after his rounds were done and the hospital had quieted down, Elijah found himself sitting in the break room, staring out at the darkening sky. The city lights flickered in the distance, and the hum of the hospital filled the background. He had always prided himself on his ability to keep moving forward, no matter what. Whether it was the long hours of medical school, the grueling days of residency, or the subtle, and sometimes not so subtle racism he had faced throughout his career, Elijah had pushed through it all. He had thought this latest battle with Miss Wallace would be just another challenge to overcome, but it had cut deeper than he expected. As he sat there, lost in thought, Dr. Karen Holloway entered the break room, holding a cup of coffee. She smiled when she saw Elijah, her expression warm but knowing. Mind if I join you? She asked. Elijah gestured to the seat across from him. Please. Dr. Holloway sat down, sipping her coffee. For a moment, they sat in companionable silence before she spoke. How are you feeling? Really? Elijah leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly. Honestly, I'm still processing it. I thought that once the case was over, it would feel like a weight lifted. And in some ways it has, but in other ways, it's still there. Dr. Holloway nodded, her expression sympathetic. That's understandable. What Miss Wallace put you through wasn't just a legal battle. It was personal. It was about your identity, your worth, your very place here. Elijah met her gaze, appreciating the way she understood. That's exactly it. It wasn't just about me as a doctor. It was about me as a black man, in a position of authority. She couldn't handle that. Dr. Holloway set her coffee down, her tone soft but firm. "And yet, you proved that you belong here. You showed everyone that you're not just here because of your qualifications. You're here because you're one of the best. The hospital knows it, the court knows it, and now Miss Wallace knows it too." Elijah smiled faintly, though his eyes remained thoughtful. "I know. But it's hard not to feel like I'm always going to have to prove myself. Like no matter how hard I work, there's always going to be someone waiting to tear me down." Dr. Holloway reached across the table, placing her hand gently on his. "Elijah, you've proven yourself time and time again. And yes, there will always be people like Miss Wallace who try to undermine you, but that doesn't diminish what you've accomplished. You're here because you earned it, and nothing she does can take that away." Elijah nodded, her words sinking in. "You're right. I just have to remind myself of that." "You don't have to do it alone," Dr. Holloway said softly. "We're all here with you. The hospital stands behind you, and we always will." Elijah smiled, feeling a sense of gratitude. "Thank you. That means a lot." As the night deepened, Elijah left the hospital, stepping into the cool evening air. The city lights stretched out before him, a reminder of the world that kept moving. No matter what battles were fought within its walls, he had won this battle, but it wasn't the last he'd face. Still, he knew now that he wasn't alone in the fight. The road ahead would have its challenges, but for now, he could breathe a little easier. He had come through stronger, more resilient. And as he walked down the street, he realized that maybe Greg had been right. It wasn't about shaking off the scars. It was about carrying them forward, letting them shape him into something stronger. And with each step, Elijah Matthews knew that he was ready for whatever came next.